Right now, in the open waters of the Western Pacific, a storm has intensified so violently and so quickly that meteorologists are already calling it historic, and it has not even reached land yet. Super Typhoon Dolphin formed on the evening of July 29, 2026, and within roughly 24 hours had exploded into a Category 5 equivalent super typhoon, according to the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, with sustained winds reported as high as 160 miles per hour and gusts measured up to 195 miles per hour. It is the fifth storm on the entire planet to reach Category 5 strength so far this year, putting 2026 ahead of the pace set during 1997, the all-time record year for Category 5 storms globally. Dolphin currently sits far out over open ocean, roughly 300 kilometers southwest of Wake Island, and poses no immediate threat to any populated landmass through this weekend. But long-range forecast models are increasingly converging on a track that carries this storm westward over the next week, potentially skimming Japan's remote Ogasawara Islands before turning toward the Nansei Islands, more commonly known as the Ryukyu Islands, home to Okinawa and roughly 1.4 million residents, and then possibly onward into the East China Sea, one of the most densely populated coastlines on the entire planet. Today we are going to break down exactly why this storm intensified so explosively, what makes it historic even before it threatens a single home, and where the actual forecast currently says millions of people could eventually find themselves in its path. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the current data, the science, and the real uncertainty still built into a forecast this far out. Drop a comment below. Have you ever lived through a typhoon or hurricane, and how much warning did you actually get before it arrived? Tell me where you were. If you want to know the moment this track becomes clearer, subscribe to Planet Shift right now. It is completely free. A thumbs up also helps enormously. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one so the algorithm actually shows it to the people who need to see it. Thank you. Now, let us get into it. Let us start with exactly where Dolphin stands right now, because the specific numbers here matter, and because different agencies tracking this exact same storm are reporting slightly different figures, for a reason worth understanding. As of Thursday, the Japan Meteorological Agency classified Dolphin as a typhoon with sustained winds around 198 kilometers per hour, roughly 123 miles per hour, using the 10-minute sustained wind averaging convention that Japan and most of the world's meteorological agencies rely on. The United States Joint Typhoon Warning Center, which uses a 1-minute sustained wind average instead, a shorter averaging window that naturally captures higher peak values, reported Dolphin's sustained winds at 160 miles per hour, placing it at Category 5 equivalent strength on the Saffir-Simpson scale used for Atlantic and Eastern Pacific hurricanes. Neither agency is wrong. They are simply measuring the same storm using two different, equally valid international conventions, precisely the same kind of measurement discrepancy we have covered before on this channel regarding earthquake magnitude calculations. What both agencies agree on is the underlying reality: this is an extraordinarily powerful, rapidly intensifying storm, regardless of which specific number you use to describe it. Now let us talk about why Dolphin intensified this explosively, because the mechanism here is not a mystery. It is textbook tropical cyclone physics operating under about as favorable a set of conditions as this part of the Pacific can currently provide. Sea surface temperatures across the region where Dolphin formed and rapidly strengthened have been measured around 32 degrees Celsius, roughly 1.1 degrees Celsius above the 30-year average for late July in this specific stretch of ocean. Warm ocean water is essentially fuel for a tropical cyclone, since it is the primary source of the heat and moisture that gets drawn upward into the storm's circulation and converted into the wind energy that defines its intensity. Alongside that unusually warm water, Dolphin has been developing under low wind shear conditions, meaning there has been very little disruptive difference in wind speed and direction at different altitudes above the storm to tear apart its developing structure. Warm water and low shear together are the two single most important ingredients for rapid intensification, and when both line up as strongly as they have for Dolphin, a storm can go from a disorganized tropical depression to a Category 5 equivalent super typhoon in a remarkably short window, exactly what has happened here over the past 2 days. Here is why meteorologists are describing this specific storm as historic, and it has nothing to do with where it might eventually make landfall. Dolphin developed and rapidly intensified to this extraordinary strength unusually close to the international dateline, in a part of the Pacific that does not typically produce storms of this intensity this early in their life cycle. Meteorologists tracking this event have specifically flagged it as the strongest typhoon on record to develop this close to the dateline, a genuinely notable data point for anyone who studies the historical record of tropical cyclone formation across this ocean basin. And Dolphin is not appearing in isolation. It is the fifth tropical cyclone anywhere on the planet to reach Category 5 strength so far in 2026, a pace that is currently running ahead of 1997, the benchmark year against which meteorologists measure an especially active global season for the most extreme storms, since 1997 ultimately produced 12 Category 5 storms across the entire year. Reaching 5 Category 5 storms globally before the calendar even turns to August is a genuinely significant marker, regardless of what any individual storm, including Dolphin, ultimately does once it approaches land. Let us walk through the actual forecast track, because this is where the story shifts from historic intensity out at sea to a genuine question of who might eventually be affected. Forecast models currently show Dolphin continuing on a general west-northwest track over the next several days, with the storm expected to pass near Japan's sparsely populated Ogasawara Islands by early next week, still functioning as a Category 3 equivalent storm by that point, and still remaining more than 620 miles, roughly 1,000 kilometers south of Tokyo itself. Beyond that point, the forecast becomes considerably more consequential for population centers, with model guidance, including forecasts from Google DeepMind's Tropical Cyclone Prediction System, one of the more accurate recent entrants into this specific forecasting field, showing Dolphin continuing generally westward through much of next week, while gradually weakening to Category 1 or Category 2 equivalent strength, before likely passing near the Nansei Islands, the Ryukyu Island chain that includes Okinawa, and eventually moving into the East China Sea on a path that would carry it toward the eastern coast of mainland China. There is a genuinely important nuance buried in that forecast that deserves real attention because it complicates the simple assumption that a weakening storm automatically becomes a less dangerous one. As Dolphin is expected to weaken from its current Category 5 equivalent peak down to Category 1 or 2 strength by the time it approaches populated areas, forecasters are also projecting that its wind field, the physical size of the area experiencing damaging winds, will expand considerably. A smaller, more intense storm concentrates its worst winds and storm surge into a tighter radius. A larger storm at lower peak intensity spreads dangerous conditions, particularly storm surge, across a much wider stretch of coastline. This means a weaker version of Dolphin arriving near a heavily populated coastline could still pose a serious storm surge threat, precisely because the physical footprint of the danger has grown even as the peak wind speed number at its core has dropped. Exactly the kind of nuance that gets lost when people only track a single headline number rather than the storm's full physical structure. Now, how confident should you actually be in any of this specific track, given that we are talking about conditions still more than a week away? The honest answer is, not very confident yet, and meteorologists tracking Dolphin are explicit about that uncertainty rather than papering over it. Different forecast model ensembles are currently disagreeing meaningfully with each other. The GFS and European ensemble models have favored a track carrying Dolphin towards southwestern Japan, potentially affecting Shikoku or Kyushu directly, while other guidance continues to favor a more southerly track closer to Okinawa itself. There is also a smaller, but real possibility that Dolphin could clip the northeastern edge of the Philippine area of responsibility before continuing toward the Ryukyu Islands, a scenario that would prompt the Philippine Weather Agency, PAGASA, to assign the storm its own separate local name, Luis, for tracking purposes within Philippine territory, even as the rest of the world continues referring to the same storm as Dolphin. None of these specific outcomes are settled yet, and forecasters are explicit that a track this far out can still shift meaningfully as the storm continues developing over the coming days. It helps to understand exactly why a week out is still considered a genuinely uncertain range in tropical cyclone forecasting, rather than assuming meteorologists simply have not finished their calculations yet. A typhoon's eventual track depends on the specific behavior of large-scale steering patterns in the atmosphere, high-pressure ridges, jet stream troughs, and the interaction between them that themselves are still evolving and being refined by weather models with each new run. Small differences in how different forecast models represent those steering patterns today can compound into meaningfully different projected tracks a week from now, which is exactly why you are seeing genuine disagreement between reputable forecasting agencies at this range, rather than a single, confidently agreed-upon path. This is not a flaw in the forecasting process. It is an accurate reflection of how much genuine atmospheric uncertainty still exists at this distance from a storm's eventual approach. Let us put this storm in the context of what has already been a remarkably active season across the Western Pacific this year. Dolphin is the 13th named storm of the 2026 Western Pacific typhoon season and the 5th storm to receive a name in July alone. As of late July, this basin had already recorded the highest number of named storms for this point in the calendar year since consistent record-keeping began in 1971. That is a genuinely significant statistic sitting underneath Dolphin's specific story. This is not simply one unusually intense storm appearing in an otherwise ordinary season, it is one especially dramatic entry in what has already been, by historical standards, an unusually productive season for named storm formation across the entire basin. This connects directly to the broader pattern we have tracked on this channel regarding record-breaking ocean heat content, since the same warm water fueling Dolphin's explosive intensification is part of the same global ocean energy surplus driving elevated sea surface temperatures across multiple ocean basins simultaneously this year. It is worth walking through the full intensity classification system here, because the terminology shifts depending on which agency and which ocean basin you are reading about, and understanding the scale helps make sense of exactly how dangerous a storm like Dolphin actually is. Japan's meteorological agency classifies storms in this basin using three broad categories: a tropical storm, a severe tropical storm, and a typhoon, with an additional informal designation of super typhoon typically applied once sustained winds reach roughly 194 kilometers per hour or higher. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center and most Western media instead translate storm intensity into the 5-category Saffir-Simpson scale originally developed for Atlantic hurricanes, where Category 5, the highest tier, begins at sustained winds of 157 miles per hour. Dolphin's reported winds place it solidly within that Category 5 equivalent range under the JTWC's measurement convention, and comfortably within Japan's own super typhoon designation as well, meaning both classification systems agree this storm sits at the most extreme end of what a tropical cyclone in this basin is physically capable of producing. Storm surge, the wall of ocean water a powerful cyclone can push ashore, tends to scale with a storm's overall size and forward wind field rather than its peak sustained wind speed alone, which circles back directly to why Dolphin's forecast expansion in physical size matters just as much as its eventual category number by the time it reaches any populated coastline. It also helps to look at recent history in this exact part of the world, because the Ryukyu Islands and Okinawa specifically have real, documented experience with powerful typhoons arriving from this general direction. In 2012, Typhoon Dolphin struck Okinawa as a Category 4 equivalent storm, with peak winds measured at 213 km per hour, grounding all flights at Naha Airport, cutting off ferry connections to the main island, and forcing residents into evacuation shelters, as the Japan Meteorological Agency warned of waves as high as 13 meters offshore. That storm moved slowly across the region, which meteorologists at the time noted would prolong the dangerous sea conditions for many additional hours compared to a faster-moving system. Okinawa's infrastructure, like much of Japan, is built with typhoon resilience specifically in mind. Reinforced construction, extensive storm shutter systems, and a population with deep generational experience preparing for exactly this kind of storm, precisely because this island chain sits directly in the path of multiple typhoons nearly every single season. That existing resilience is worth keeping in mind alongside any future dolphin-related warnings, in the same way Japan's earthquake-resilient construction has repeatedly proven itself capable of turning a geologically extreme event into a survivable one, though as we have covered elsewhere on this channel, that resilience is a mitigating factor, never a guarantee against real damage or disruption. So what does all of this actually mean for you right now, depending on where you are? If you live anywhere in Japan's Ryukyu Islands, Kyushu, Shikoku, Taiwan, or along China's eastern coastline, this is genuinely too early to be taking specific individual action, since the forecast track itself is still meaningfully uncertain and could shift considerably over the coming days. What is worth doing right now is simply beginning to monitor official sources directly, the Japan Meteorological Agency, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and if you are in the Philippines, Pagasa, all of which will update their forecasts daily as Dolphin's actual track becomes clearer over the next several days. If you live in a region that regularly deals with typhoon season, this is also a reasonable moment to do a basic review of your own household's preparedness, checking that emergency supplies, important documents, and your family's communication plan are in reasonable order. Not because Dolphin is confirmed to be heading toward you specifically, but because doing that kind of review calmly, a week ahead of any potential storm, is considerably easier than doing it in a rush once an actual warning is issued. What makes Dolphin worth tracking closely over the coming week is not any single confirmed threat to a specific city, because that threat, if it materializes at all, has not yet been confirmed by the forecast. It is that this storm has already demonstrated, in the span of about 24 hours, exactly how quickly a favorable combination of warm water and low wind shear can turn a developing tropical system into one of the most powerful storms on the planet this year. And it is now approaching, however uncertainly, some of the most densely populated coastline on Earth. 5 Category 5 storms globally before August even arrives is not a statistic that exists in isolation. It sits inside a broader pattern of record ocean heat and increasingly active storm seasons that this channel has tracked across multiple ocean basins this year alone. Whether Dolphin ultimately weakens harmlessly over open water, brushes past Okinawa as a considerably reduced storm, or continues on toward a direct, damaging encounter with eastern China's coastline, is still a genuinely open question that will only resolve over the coming days as forecast models converge on more consistent guidance. We will keep tracking this as it develops, every updated track, every intensity change, and whatever the coming week reveals about exactly where this historic storm is actually headed. Subscribe to Planet Shift so you do not miss it. And leave that comment below. Have you ever lived through a typhoon or hurricane, and how much warning did you actually get before it arrived? Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. See you in the next one.